The black car stopped so fast that the tires screamed against the wet pavement like something was dying. Inside that car, one of the most powerful men in America sat frozen with his hand pressed flat against the back of the driver's seat, his knuckles white, his breath gone completely. Because standing 3 feet from the front bumper of his car, soaking wet, holding a small plastic tray of food she was trying to sell, was a woman he had spent 4 years trying to forget. And sitting on a little wooden stool beside her, wrapped in an oversized yellow raincoat, eating from a small bowl with 2 tiny hands, was a child. A child with his jaw, his cheekbones, his exact smile. The same smile his mother used to frame in photographs and hang on the wall of their old house in Cincinnati and say, "That smile is going to either save the world or break it." He did not move. He did not breathe. He just stared through that rain-streaked window at a little face that looked like someone had reached inside his chest, pulled out the best part of him, and given it a body. His driver was already out of the car, apologizing, waving his hands, making sure nobody was hurt. But the man in the back seat could not move, because the woman had not looked up yet. She was focused on the child, wiping the child's mouth with the edge of her sleeve, saying something soft that made the child laugh. That laugh went straight through the car window and straight through 5 years of silence and straight through every wall he had built around himself since the night she disappeared without a single word. And then she looked up, and time stopped in a way that no amount of money, no boardroom, no private jet, no penthouse view had ever been able to make happen. Her eyes found the car. Then they found the window. Then they found him, and she turned to stone. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart beating faster, do us a favor right now. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances. And drop a comment below telling us, did he deserve to know? We will get back to this story in just a moment. But first, show us some love, because this story is about to change everything you think you know about love, lost secrets, and the impossible courage it takes to come back from the worst mistake of your life. Now let us go back. Way back, because to understand why that woman turned to stone when she saw that man through that rain-streaked car window, you need to understand who they were before the silence, before the disappearing, before the secret that was now sitting on a little wooden stool eating from a small bowl with 2 tiny hands. His name was not important yet. What was important was what he was. He was the kind of man that rooms adjusted themselves for when he walked in, not because he was loud, not because he demanded it, but because there was something in the way he moved through the world that made people instinctively feel that whatever was about to happen, this man was going to be at the center of it. He had grown up with nothing. That was the part of his story that his publicists loved to put in magazines and his investors loved to repeat at dinner parties. Grew up with nothing. Father left when he was 4. Mother worked 2 jobs. Shared a bedroom with 2 brothers in a house where the heat only worked half the time. He used to do homework under the streetlight outside because the electricity got cut off twice a year without fail. But what the magazines always left out, what the publicists never mentioned, was that growing up with nothing had not made him hard the way it makes some people hard. It had made him hungry in a different way. Not hungry for revenge against the world. Hungry to build something that would last. Hungry to create something that meant something. Hungry to prove that where you start does not have to be where you end. By the time he was 32 years old, he had built 3 companies from scratch, sold 2 of them, kept the third, and turned it into something that people in financial magazines kept calling a phenomenon. He had a driver. He had an office on the 47th floor of a building with his name on it. He had a watch that cost more than his mother's house. He had everything, except the one thing he had made the mistake of letting go, or more accurately, the one thing that had let go of him. She had come into his life in the most ordinary way possible, which was the first thing that had thrown him completely off balance. Because by the time she appeared, nothing in his life was ordinary anymore. Everything was arranged. Everything was scheduled. Everything was filtered through assistants and gatekeepers and people whose entire job was to make sure that the only things that reached him were the things that deserved to reach him. She had bypassed all of that completely by accident. She was not supposed to be in that elevator. He had just finished a meeting that had gone 3 hours longer than it should have, and he was tired in that specific way that success makes you tired, where you are exhausted but you cannot explain why because on paper everything is going exactly the way you planned. He stepped into the elevator on the 47th floor and pressed the lobby button, and the doors were almost closed when a hand shot through the gap. The doors opened again. She stepped in. She was carrying a stack of folders, so tall that she had to tilt her head sideways to see around them. She was wearing a blazer that was slightly too big for her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had started the day with a plan for it, and the day had had other ideas. She had a pen tucked behind her ear and another one in her hand, and she was muttering something under her breath that sounded like a very quiet argument she was having with herself about something that had not gone the way she wanted it to. She did not notice him. Not at first. She stepped into the elevator, positioned herself in the corner, balanced the folders against the wall, pushed the lobby button even though it was already lit, and went back to her muttering. He watched her. In 4 years of running a company, nobody had ever stepped into an elevator with him and not noticed him. Not because he demanded to be noticed, but because his face was on the cover of a magazine in the lobby of this very building. Because the receptionist always said his name loudly when he walked past. Because everyone in this building knew exactly who he was. She did not know, or if she did, she was the first person in 4 years who did not care. The elevator went down. She kept muttering, reorganizing the folders against the wall. The pen behind her ear fell out and bounced off her shoulder and hit the elevator floor, and she made a small sound of frustration and crouched down to get it without letting the folders fall, which required a kind of focused physical negotiation that he found himself watching with something that felt embarrassingly close to admiration. She got the pen. The folders did not fall. She stood back up, and then she turned slightly and finally registered that she was not alone in the elevator. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, very simply and very honestly, "Sorry, did I just take your pen?" He said, "I don't have a pen." She looked at the pen in her hand, then at the pen behind her ear, then at him. "I have 2 pens," she said, sounding genuinely confused about how this had happened. "You came in with 2 pens," he said. She thought about this. "That does track," she said. "Sorry. Long day." "How long?" "Started yesterday," she said. The elevator opened at the lobby. She gathered her folders and walked out, and he stood there for an extra half-second watching her go and thinking that he could not remember the last time a conversation had made him feel that light. He asked his assistant about her the next morning. His assistant, who had been with him for 6 years and who knew him better than most people, looked at him for a long moment and then pulled up the employee directory without saying a word. She worked in the communications department. 3rd floor. She had been with the company for 7 months. Her record was excellent. Her supervisor had flagged her twice for going above and beyond on projects. She had a degree in journalism from a state school in Ohio. She had grown up in Columbus. Columbus was 2 hours from Cincinnati, where he had grown up. He told himself this was not meaningful. He told himself a lot of things over the next 3 weeks while he found increasingly transparent reasons to be on the 3rd floor. She figured it out on the 4th visit. He had stopped by the communications department under the pretense of asking about a press release, which was a kind of task that absolutely did not require the CEO to show up in person. She had looked up from her desk and looked at him with an expression that was just slightly too knowing for comfort and said, "The press release was emailed to your office this morning. Did you not get it?" He said, "I want to discuss it in person." She said, "Which part?" He said, "The 2nd paragraph." She pulled up the file on her computer. "Read the 2nd paragraph." Looked at him. "It says the company exceeded quarterly expectations for the 3rd consecutive year." "Right. What about it?" He said, "I thought it could be stronger." She looked at the sentence again, looked at him again, and then she did something that nobody in this building had done to him in 4 years. She smiled the way people smile when they know exactly what is happening, and they are choosing to be kind about it rather than cruel. She said, "How would you like it to read?" And just like that, they were talking. Not about the press release, about writing, about words, about why some sentences land and others just sit there, about how growing up without much money makes you either love words or fear them, because words are the one thing nobody can take away from you. He stayed on the 3rd floor for 2 hours that day. His assistant rescheduled 4 meetings. Nobody said anything, but everybody noticed. What followed over the next several months was not a courtship in the traditional sense. It was more like two people who had both spent a long time building very effective walls around themselves, slowly discovering that the other person was standing on the same side of the wall without either of them having planned it. They had lunch, then dinner, then long walks after work that neither of them had exactly planned, but that kept happening anyway. They talked about everything, about Cincinnati and Columbus, about shared bedrooms and streetlights and homework done in the cold, about what it felt like to want more than what you were given without being ashamed of having wanted it, about what it felt like to get it and discover that it was both exactly what you thought it would be and completely different. She made him laugh in a way that felt like remembering something he had forgotten about himself. He made her feel, she told him once at the end of a very long evening, like she did not have to explain herself. I always feel like I have to explain myself, she said. Like if I don't, people get the wrong idea about who I am. Who are you, he asked. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything seriously. Someone who is still figuring it out, she said, but not scared of the figuring. He thought about that for a long time after. He was not used to people who were not scared of the figuring. Most people he knew had decided who they were a long time ago and were now just defending that decision. The idea of someone still in the middle of becoming something, genuinely unafraid of the process, was more remarkable to him than anything he had built. He fell in love with her the way people fall into deep water. Not all at once, step by step, wading in, until one day he looked down and realized his feet were not touching the bottom anymore. She fell too. He could see it in the way she stopped explaining herself around him, the way she left the second pen behind her ear even when she was dressed up, the way she started finishing his sentences not because she was showing off, but because she had been listening closely enough to know where they were going. They were together for a year before he told her he loved her. He was not the kind of man who said those words easily. They had to be earned, not by her, by him. He had to earn the right to say them by being sure enough that they were true. When he finally said them, they were sitting on the fire escape outside her apartment on the east side of the city, sharing a takeout container of food she had made too much of, and she had said something funny about the neighbor's cat, and he had laughed, and then the laugh had faded, and he had looked at her in the orange glow of the city night, and the words had simply come out of him like something that had been waiting a long time for the door to open. She went very still. He thought for one terrible second that he had miscalculated, that the wall was still there, that he had waded in too deep, and she was still standing with her feet on the bottom. And then she put down the takeout container and turned toward him and put her hand on the side of his face with a gentleness so complete that he felt it in every part of himself. I know, she said. I love you too. I've been waiting for you to get there. How long? 6 months, she said. You waited 6 months? You needed time, she said simply. I could see that. So I waited. He had never had someone wait for him before. Not like that. Not patiently. Not without agenda. Just waiting because she could see what he needed, and she was willing to give it to him. He thought about that on every hard day after. The year that followed was the best year of his life. Not because everything was perfect. It was not. His company went through a difficult stretch where 2 major contracts fell apart at the same time, and he spent 3 months in crisis mode that required everything he had. She did not try to fix it. She did not pretend it was fine. She just stayed, made coffee, read in the chair beside his desk on the late nights, handed him things when he reached for them without him having to ask, was there in the specific, quiet, indispensable way that only people who love you without condition know how to be there. He bought a ring 6 months before he actually used it. It lived in the inside pocket of his jacket for so long that his dry cleaner eventually asked him if he was aware that there was a small box in his jacket pocket. He was aware. He was just waiting. For what? He could not have said exactly. Not for the right moment. He was not a man who believed in right moments. He believed in right decisions. He was waiting to be absolutely certain that he was making the right decision. Not because he doubted her, but because she deserved certainty. She deserved to be chosen completely, not tentatively. She deserved a man who was all the way in. He was getting there. He was 2 weeks away from getting there when the thing happened that changed everything. He was in a meeting when his phone buzzed. His assistant's number. He never answered during meetings, but something made him pick up. His assistant said very carefully, "Sir, there's something you should probably know before you see it somewhere else." He excused himself from the meeting. The thing his assistant told him was this. There was a photograph. It had been taken at a charity gala he had attended 3 weeks earlier. In the photograph, he was talking to a woman he had known for years, a woman from his industry, a tall, elegant woman who had been a friend of his family for as long as he could remember. In the photograph, she had her hand on his arm and was laughing at something he had said, and they were standing close together in the way that people stand when they are comfortable with each other. The photograph had been published that morning in a gossip column with a headline that said something about a secret romance between two of the city's most eligible people. He said, "That's ridiculous. She's like my aunt." His assistant said, "Yes, sir, but the column is saying—" "I know what the column is saying. It's wrong." "Yes, sir, but—" "Send a correction. Whatever needs to happen. Handle it." He went back into his meeting. What he did not do, what would haunt him for years that he did not do, was call her immediately, tell her himself, before she saw it, before she read the headline and the caption, and the implication that was buried in the careful wording of people who get paid to imply things they cannot prove. He told himself he would call her that evening. He was in back-to-back meetings until 8. He called at 8:15. She did not answer. He assumed she was busy. He texted, said he needed to talk to her, said it was about something she had probably already seen, said not to worry, said he would explain everything. She did not respond that night. He told himself she was tired. He told himself she would call in the morning. In the morning, he called again. Voicemail. He called her work line. Her colleague said she had called in sick. He drove to her apartment. She was not there. Her neighbor, an older woman who had always liked him, opened her door when she heard him knocking and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read and said very quietly, "She left this morning. Early. With 2 bags. She said to tell anyone who came looking that she was fine." He stood in that hallway for a long time. She was fine. 2 bags. He called everyone he could think of, her work friends, her college roommate, her sister in Columbus. The sister picked up on the second ring, and the second she heard his voice, she said, "She's fine. She doesn't want to talk right now. Please respect that." Respect what? I don't even know what happened. I need to explain. She knows what she saw. She saw a photograph of me talking to someone at a party. That's all it was. That woman is like family to me. There is nothing. "I believe you," the sister said. "Then tell her." "I can't do that. I'm sorry." She hung up. He did not understand. He could not understand why a photograph of him talking to someone at a party, a photograph that was clearly a gossip column spinning nothing into something, could make a woman who had waited 6 months for him to say, "I love you," a woman who had stayed through his worst months without complaint, a woman who had put her hand on his face with that impossible gentleness, packed 2 bags and vanished before the sun came up. He did not understand, because he did not know what she knew that he did not. He did not know that 3 days before the photograph appeared, she had seen something else. Not a gossip column, not a headline, not a photograph of 2 people standing close at a party. She had seen a card. It had come to his office by mistake, mixed in with a stack of correspondence his assistant had brought down to the 3rd floor for signature. She had been covering for her colleague that afternoon, sitting at the front desk, going through the stack for routing. The card was cream-colored and expensive, the kind of card that comes with flowers or with a very significant gift. It was already open, already read, and she had seen enough of it before she realized she was reading something private. The words she had seen were these: "I know you've been waiting. I've been waiting too. Our families have known for years that this makes sense. When you're ready, I'll be ready. I'm not going anywhere." No signature, just initials, the same initials as the woman in the photograph. The woman he had said was like family. The woman his assistant had said was an old family friend. A family friend who was telling him she was waiting for him. A family friend who said their families had known for years that it made sense. She had put the card back in the stack. She had sat very still at that desk for a long time. And then she had done the thing she always did when something hurt her deeply, which was to think about it very carefully before she reacted. She thought about it for 3 days. She thought about the card, about the words, about families knowing for years, about this woman waiting, about him never mentioning this woman, about the fact that in a year of loving him and being loved by him, there had always been a small, careful distance around certain parts of his life, a door she had never felt fully invited through. She thought about the photograph when it appeared. She thought about the way he was looking at this woman, in the photograph, not like she was like an aunt, like she was someone whose opinion mattered to him in a specific way. She thought about the fact that she had discovered 2 weeks ago that she was pregnant. She had been working up the courage to tell him. She had been trying to find the right way, not because she was afraid of his reaction, but because she wanted it to be right. She wanted to tell him, and for it to be a beginning, not a complication. She wanted to tell him after he knew that she was the one he was choosing, without question, without family arrangements or old understandings or cards from women who were waiting. She wanted to tell him when she was sure he was sure, and now she was not sure. So she left. She packed 2 bags, and she left before the sun came up, and she told her sister enough that her sister would protect her, and she did not call him, and she did not answer when he called, and she told herself she was protecting herself, which was true, and she told herself she was protecting the baby, which was also true, and she told herself that a man who had a family arrangement he had never mentioned did not deserve to know about a baby he had never planned for, which was the part that was not entirely true, but which felt true enough in the dark and the fear and the loneliness of early morning. She went to Columbus, to her sister's house. She cried for 3 days. Then she stopped crying and started planning, because she had not survived everything she had survived by staying on the floor. She did not call him. He, on his end, hired a private investigator 3 months after she disappeared. The investigator found that she had gone to Columbus, but by the time the investigator reported back, she had left Columbus and moved again. She was careful. She did not want to be found. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He shut the investigation down, because somewhere in those 3 months, something had shifted inside him, not from love to indifference. It was not that simple, but from reaching out to deciding that if she had left without a word, if she had chosen to vanish rather than ask him a question, then perhaps she had made a decision, and he owed her enough respect to accept it. He was wrong, but he was also broken in a way he did not have the vocabulary for, because it had only been fully open with one person in his adult life, and she had walked away from it, and he did not know what to do with that except to close the door again, quietly, and go back to building things, which was the only language he had ever really been fluent in. The card, by the way, the card he never knew she had seen, the card that had started everything. He had read it and filed it away as what it was, a declaration from a woman he had known his whole life who had, for as long as he could remember, operated on the assumption that their family's friendship would eventually become something more. He had never encouraged it. He had never discouraged it directly either, which was a failure of omission that had cost him more than he knew. He had simply existed in the polite ambiguity that people from certain kind of families sometimes exist in, where things are understood without being said, and he had trusted that his life and his choices were speaking for themselves. They were not speaking loudly enough. The woman who had sent the card was not a villain. She was a person who had read the situation incorrectly and who had acted on that misreading, and who had no idea that her carefully worded card on expensive cream paper had been seen by the wrong eyes and had started a chain reaction that would take 5 years to finish playing out. After the woman he loved disappeared, he eventually did what people do when they have too much money and too much emptiness and too little ability to sit still with both. He worked. He expanded. He traveled. He sat across from suitable people at arranged dinners and felt nothing. He attended the kind of events where the photographs that ended up in gossip columns were taken, and he was careful now. So careful about how he stood and who touched his arm and what the camera might see. He did not marry the woman with the card. He did not marry anyone. He went 4 years into the future as a man who had everything and understood, in a specific, quiet, unshakable way that only real loss teaches you, that he had already had the one thing that mattered, and he had lost it, and he did not know why, and that not knowing was a thing he carried every day. And then his driver stopped the car too fast on a wet street, and the tires screamed, and he looked through the rain-streaked window, and the world turned upside down, because she was there, with a smile on a child's face. And she had turned to stone when she saw him, For a long moment, neither of them moved. His driver was talking to her. She was not hearing him. She was staring at the car window with an expression that was made of so many things at once that it looked like a person trying to hold a building together with their bare hands. He opened the car door. He had not planned to. His body did it before his mind approved the action. He stepped out into the wet street. She took one step back. He stopped. They looked at each other across 4 years in a distance of about 8 feet that felt like the longest distance either of them had ever faced. The child looked up from the bowl, looked at the tall man standing in the street, looking at his mother like she was the answer to a question he had been asking for a very long time. The child was about 3 years old enough to sense that this moment was different from other moments, small enough to not know why. The child looked at the man with open, uncomplicated curiosity. The way children look at things before the world teaches them to look sideways. He looked at the child. The child had his jaw, his cheekbones, his exact smile, which was currently not deployed because the child was being serious and watchful, but which lived in the shape of the mouth and the set of the chin in a way that was so exact, so unmistakable, that he felt the ground shift slightly under his feet. He looked at her. She was doing the thing her sister had described once, years ago, when she said that when something really scared her, she went completely still, not like a person who had given up, but like a person gathering every single thing they had before they moved. She was gathering. He waited. She said, at last, very quietly, and with control in her voice that he recognized as something that was costing her enormously, "You should get back in your car." He said, "I can't do that." She said, "You need to." He said, "Tell me his name." She went so still that she barely seemed to be breathing. He said it again, softer, "Tell me his name." She looked at the child. The child was still looking at the tall man with that open, uncomplicated curiosity. She looked back at the man, and in her eyes he saw the exact moment when the gathering was done and the decision was made, and she said, very quietly, so the child could not hear, "Marcus." The name landed on him like something physical. His grandfather's name. She knew his grandfather's name because he had told her about his grandfather on a fire escape outside her apartment on a warm evening a lifetime ago, about a man who had worked 3 jobs and never complained, and who had died before he could see what his grandson was going to become, about a man whose name he had always thought deserved to be given to someone. She had given it to someone. He could not speak. She said, still quietly, still controlled, still costing her everything, "Now please get back in your car." "You named him Marcus." "Yes." "You," he stopped, started again. "How old is he?" She looked at him for a long time. 3, she said. The math was not complicated. He said, "You were pregnant when you left." She did not answer. "You knew," he said. "When you left, you already knew." She looked away from him, at the street, at the wet pavement, at something in the middle distance that was easier than his face. "Yes," she said. The word was barely audible. He put his hand on the roof of the car because he needed something solid. He needed something that was not moving because everything else was moving. The ground, the air, the last 4 years of his life reorienting themselves around a single 3-letter word. Yes, she had known. She had left knowing. She had carried his child alone for 9 months and then raised that child alone for 3 years without a single word because she had seen a card on expensive cream paper and a photograph in a gossip column and had decided that this was not a man she could trust her whole heart to. He wanted to be angry. He could feel the anger right there, right beneath the surface, pressing up like something trying to get out. But then he looked at Marcus. Marcus had finished his food and was now standing on the little wooden stool, testing its stability with the experimental confidence of small children who have not yet been fully introduced to consequence. He was wearing the oversized yellow raincoat, and his hair was sticking up in the back in a way that was so perfectly, genetically familiar that the anger dissolved before it could fully form. He looked at her again, and what he felt, underneath everything else, underneath the shock and the math and the reorientation of 4 years of loss, was something that took him a moment to identify. Relief. She had not left because she stopped loving him. She had left because she was afraid. That was different. He did not fully understand yet what she had been afraid of. He did not know about the card she had seen. He did not know about the words, she had read. He did not know about the assumption she had carried for 4 years that he had eventually married someone else and moved on. The assumption her fear had built into a certainty, because certainty, even terrible certainty, is easy to live with than not knowing. He only knew that she was here, that Marcus was here, that his grandfather's name was walking around on little legs testing the structural integrity of a small wooden stool, and that whatever had broken needed to be fixed. He said, "I want to talk to you." She said, "There's nothing to talk about." He said, "There's everything to talk about. You have somewhere to be," she said. "You always have somewhere to be." "Not today." She looked at him, then at the car, then at his driver, who had the professional discretion of a man who had been driving powerful people for a long time and had perfected the art of being invisible. She said, I have my things here. My stall. I can't just leave." He said, "I'll wait." "You'll wait. However long it takes." She looked at him with an expression that was not quite belief and not quite disbelief, something in between. The expression of a person who has built a life on the expectation of not being waited for, and is now looking at someone who claims to be willing to wait, and is trying to decide if they are reading it correctly. Marcus said very clearly and very loudly, "Mama, who is that man?" She looked at her son. He looked at his son. The word, even thought and not spoken, was seismic. She said to Marcus, with a steadiness that he had to admire, "Someone Mama knows." Marcus looked at the man with the calm assessment of a 3-year-old who had been raised by a woman who told him to always look at things carefully before deciding what he thought of them. He looked for a long time, and then he said with great confidence, "He has my face." The street went quiet. She closed her eyes. He pressed his hand harder against the roof of the car, and Marcus, unaware that he just said the most devastating and most honest thing that would be said on this street today, stepped off the stool, picked up his empty bowl, and held out toward his mother with the universal gesture of a small person who has finished eating and would now like someone else to deal with the bowl. She took the bowl. She looked at the man. She said very quietly, 1 hour. There's a coffee place 2 blocks down. Give me 20 minutes to pack this up." He nodded. He got back in the car. He sat in the back seat in complete silence for 20 minutes, while his driver sat in the front in a professionally invisible way that he had mastered, until the man in the back seat said, quietly, "James." His driver said, "Sir, did you see the child?" A pause. "Yes, sir." "Okay," he said. That was all. 20 minutes later, she appeared at the window of the coffee shop with Marcus on her hip and a bag over her shoulder, and the expression of someone walking towards something they've been both dreading and, in some part of themselves they would not admit to, waiting for. He was already inside. He had chosen a table in the back, away from windows, away from people who might recognize him, and make this moment into something other than what it needed to be. She came in, settled Marcus at the table with a small toy from her bag, sat down, did not take off her jacket. The jacket was armor, and they both knew it. He waited until she was settled. Then he said, "Why?" She looked at him. "You know why." "Tell me anyway." She said, "I saw the card." He went still. "What card?" "The cream card. The expensive one. It came to your office by mistake, and I was covering the front desk that afternoon." She looked at her hands. "I wasn't trying to read it. I saw enough by accident. The part about families knowing for years. About her waiting for you." He was very quiet for a moment. "You thought it was an arrangement." "I thought it was something you'd never told me about." It wasn't an arrangement. She had convinced herself it was something it wasn't. "I never—" He stopped. "I should have addressed it directly. I knew it existed, and I let it exist in the background because I thought my life was speaking for itself. I was wrong. You never mentioned her. Because she wasn't real to me in the way she was presenting herself in that card. She was a family friend. Someone from a different life." He looked at her steadily. "You were my life." She looked up. "You should have talked to me," he said. "When you saw the card, you should have said something." "I know." Instead of, "I know." Her voice was harder now. "But you need to understand what it felt like. You need to understand that I was 2 weeks away from telling you something enormous, and I found that card, and then I saw that photograph, and I thought, I thought you had someone else. Someone your family had already chosen. Someone who fit. And I was... She stopped. You were what? She looked at Marcus, who was very busy with his toy and paying no attention to the adults. She lowered her voice. I was terrified. I was alone and terrified. And I thought that if I told you about the baby and you chose her anyway, I would not survive that. I know that sounds. I know it was wrong. I know I should have trusted you enough to ask. But I couldn't. The silence between them was full. He said after a long time, I hired an investigator. She looked up. 3 months after you left. He found you in Columbus. By the time he reported back, you had moved again. I shut it down. Why did you shut it down? He looked at her. Because you were careful about not being found. And I thought you had made your decision. I thought I owed you enough respect to accept it. She was very still. You thought I just walked away. You did walk away, he said without cruelty. I walked away because I thought you were about to marry someone else. I never married anyone. She looked at him. I never even came close, he said. I came close once. And she left. And I spent 4 years not understanding why. Her eyes were bright with something she was working hard to contain. Marcus looked up from his toy at that moment and looked at his mother, and then at the man, and then back at his mother. He had the acute social sensitivity of a child who has spent most of his time with one parent and has therefore become an expert at reading that parent's emotional weather. He climbed down from his chair and went to his mother and leaned against her arm the way of small children who are not sure what is wrong, but are certain that they are capable of helping. She put her arm around him. He looked at the man with those eyes, his jaw, his grandfather's name. The man said softly to the child, Hi. Marcus said, Hi. I'm sorry if we scared you. Outside. Marcus considered this. You didn't scare me, he said, with the dignity of a 3-year-old who takes his courage seriously. Cars are loud. They are. The man agreed. Marcus looked at him for another long moment. You have my face, he said again, slightly less loudly this time, but with the same absolute certainty. The man said, I know. Marcus absorbed this, looked at his mother, looked back at the man, made the kind of fundamental 3-year-old calculation that bypasses all adult complication and lands directly on truth. Are you my dad? He asked. The coffee shop was not very full, but the few people in it did not seem to exist in that moment. There was only this table, this woman with her arm around this child, this man who had spent 4 years carrying a ring in his jacket pocket, and then finally, put in a drawer in his apartment where it still lived today. He looked at her. She looked at him. And for the first time since she had turned to stone on the wet street, something in her face moved that was not control or armor or the careful steadiness of a woman who has learned to carry everything alone. He said to the child very carefully, very honestly, That's something your mama and I need to talk about. Marcus thought about this with great seriousness. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and climbed back up into his chair and returned to his toy. She let out a breath. He let out a breath. And then, for the first time since he had stepped out of that car onto the wet street, she looked at him with something other than stone. She looked at him with something that was very, very tired and very, very scared, and somewhere underneath all that, trying hard not to be visible, something that was still, impossibly, the same thing it had fallen into on a fire escape a lifetime ago. I need to know something, she said. He waited. She said, Did you love me? Back then. Really. He looked at her for a long time. I had a ring, he said, in my inside jacket pocket, for 6 months before you left. I was 2 weeks from using it. The something that was trying hard not to be visible in her eyes got harder to contain. She said very quietly, I didn't know that. I know, he said. That was my fault. I should have been clearer. I should have, he stopped, reorganized. I was afraid of saying it until I was completely certain. I wanted to be all the way in before I asked. I thought certainty was a gift I could give you. I didn't realize I was making you feel uncertain in the meantime. She looked at her hands. I'm sorry, she said, for leaving without asking, for not trusting you enough to just ask. I'm sorry, he said, for not being clear enough that there was nothing to be afraid of. Across the table, 3 years old and completely unaware that the conversation he was sitting next to was a hinge on which his entire future was swinging, Marcus had successfully balanced a small toy on top of another small toy and was regarding his achievement with immense satisfaction. His parents watched him. Neither of them had said that word out loud yet, but it was there, sitting between them like a third adult at the table. He said, "I want to be part of his life." She looked up. "I'm not asking you to do anything except let me be part of his life," he said. "Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide, whatever you feel, he deserves to know who he is." She was very quiet. "He named himself," the man said, with a softness that surprised even him. "In a way. He said I have his face. He already knows who he is. He just needs me to confirm it." She swallowed. "Okay," she said. Very small, very careful, but real. "Okay," he said. They sat in the coffee shop for 2 more hours. They ordered things and drank things, and Marcus fell asleep in his mother's arms, and then on the small couch in the corner that the coffee shop had clearly placed there for exactly this kind of moment. And the adults talked. Not about everything. You cannot do everything in one afternoon, but about enough. She learned that he had not married, that the woman with the card had eventually understood and had been gracious about it, which was consistent with her character, even if her assumption had been catastrophically costly. That he had spent 4 years building things with a specific, focused, slightly desperate energy of a person who is filling a space that is shaped like someone else. He learned that she had spent the last 4 years building something too. Her own thing. Small, but hers. A food business. Started from her apartment. Grown into a small catering operation. Grown further into a stall at the market 2 days a week. And a permanent spot at the food hall downtown 3 days a week. And 3 employees. And a business loan she was 2 years into paying off. And a lease on a small commercial kitchen and a plan. A real plan. The kind of plan that belongs to someone who has decided that if the world is not going to hand you anything, you will build it yourself, and it will be better because you built it. He had spent 4 years building things to fill a space shaped like her. She had spent 4 years building things to prove that the space did not need to be filled. He listened to her tell him this with something that was equal parts pride and heartbreak. She listened to him tell her his version with something that was equal parts grief and relief. Marcus slept on the couch. Outside the coffee shop, the day moved forward the way days do, without asking permission, without waiting for resolution. When they finally stepped outside, Marcus was awake again and asking for something to eat, which seemed like an extremely reasonable request given the events of the day. She settled with a snack from her bag and looked at the man and said, "I don't know what comes next." He said, "We figure out." She said, "Step by step." "Feet on the ground," he said. She looked at him. He said, "You said that once. On the fire escape. You said you were not scared of figuring." She was quiet for a moment. "I said that a long time ago." "I know," he said, "but I've been carrying it ever since." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough for Marcus to finish his snack and to ask if they could go home and to announce that his feet were tired, which was a claim she found unlikely but chose not to contest. She said to the man, "I need time." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm not ready for more than this right now." He said, "This is already more than I had this morning." She almost smiled. Almost. It was not yet a smile, but it was a shape that a smile leaves behind when it has been somewhere and is considering coming back. She gave him her number. He saved it with a steadiness that she could see cost him something, because he was the kind of person who, having nearly lost something once, handled it differently the second time. She took Marcus home. He stood on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop for a long time. His driver came around and said very quietly, "Sir?" He said, "Give me a minute, James." James gave him a minute. He stood there with the number in his phone, and the afternoon settling around him, and 4 years reorganizing themselves in his chest into something that felt, for the first time, like it had a shape he could understand. He had not lost her because she had stopped. He had not lost her because of failure. He had lost her to fear, to a card on expensive paper, to a photograph, to silence on both sides, to 2 people who loved each other very much and were both, in their different ways, too careful about saying so at the right moment. That was something you could work with. That was something very different from gone. He got back in the car. James drove. The city moved around them. And in a small apartment across town, a woman put her son to bed and sat on the edge of his mattress and watched him sleep and thought about the shape of his jaw and his cheekbones and the smile that was currently soft in sleep and that looked like a man she had spent 4 years trying to forget and had clearly failed at forgetting. Because here it was, sleeping in her child's face, in the child she had named after his grandfather, because she had been unable to let that story go completely even when she was trying to. She had been trying so hard. She had been carrying so much. She sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time. Then she took out her phone and looked at the number he had given her when they were standing outside the coffee shop, written on the back of a card because he was the kind of man who still carried cards even in an era when nobody carried cards. She had programmed it in already, which she was choosing not to analyze right now. She looked at it. She did not text, but she kept looking. And across town, in an apartment on the 47th floor of a building with his name on it, a man sat at a window looking out at the city and thought about a child with his grandfather's name and his own jaw and eyes that were open and unafraid in the specific way of a person who has been raised by someone who told him that looking carefully is the first step to understanding. She had raised him like that, alone. He thought about that. He thought about all the days and nights and firsts that had happened without him. He thought about the first word and the first step, and the first time Marcus had been scared in the night and needed someone, and she had been there alone and had been enough because she was the kind of person who was always enough even when it cost everything. He thought about the ring in the drawer. He did not take it out. Not yet, but for the first time in 4 years. He thought about it with something other than the sealed, careful grief he had learned to carry it with. He thought about it with something that was tentative and new and very much alive. He did not text her either, but he kept the phone close. Both of them, on opposite sides of the same city, sitting with something that was not yet resolved but was no longer broken the way that broken means unrepairable. This was broken the way of something that had been dropped and had fallen into separate pieces, and those pieces were all still there, and some of us would have to pick them up very carefully and put them back together again. And it was going to take time and patience, and the willingness to handle each piece with enough care to not break it further. But the pieces were there. That was the thing. The pieces were there. The next morning he called. She answered on the third ring, which told him something, because she was not the kind of person who picked up calls she was not ready for. He said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." A pause. He said, "How is he?" And she understood from the way he asked it, the specific weight in those 3 words, that this man had spent the night thinking about a child he had met yesterday and was now asking about him the way people ask about things they have already decided to love. She said, "He woke up at 6 and immediately asked for pancakes and told me there was a spider in his room, which turned out to be a piece of lint." He laughed. It was the same laugh she remembered from the fire escape. The same laugh that lived somewhere underneath all the careful, controlled 47th floor of a building with your name on it exterior. The laugh of the boy from Cincinnati who had done homework under streetlights. She had missed that laugh. She had not admitted that to herself until just now. She said, "He also asked about you." Silence. He asked if the man with his face was coming back. The silence was a different kind now. He said, "What did you tell him?" She said carefully, "I told him probably." He said, "Can we move probably to yes?" She was quiet. He said, "Not for us. I'm not asking about us yet. I'm asking about him. Can he have a yes?" She looked across the kitchen at Marcus, who was eating pancakes with the focused dedication of a small person for whom pancakes are currently the most important thing in the world. She said, "Yes." He said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me. He deserves it." "He does," the man said. "But so do you. You raised him. You gave him that name. You raised him to look at things carefully and not be afraid. I know you did that. I can see it in him already. So thank you." She was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He wants to meet you properly, not just accidentally in the street. Tell me when." "Saturday. The park on Millbrook. There's a climbing structure he is obsessed with. He'll be at his best there. Happy. In his element. You can see who he actually is." "Saturday," he said. "What time?" 10. "I'll be there at 10. She said, "Don't be late. He said, I won't. She said, he'll remember if you are. I know, he said. I won't. She believed him. That was the part that surprised her. She believed him before she even decided to. Saturday came. He was there at 9:45. She arrived at 10 with Marcus in his red jacket and small sneakers that lit up when he walked. Marcus saw the climbing structure immediately and looked at his mother, and she said yes before he asked, because she always knew what he was about to ask, and he ran for structure with the full-body commitment of a 3-year-old who has decided that climbing is the most urgent thing in the world. The man stood a few feet away. She stood next to him. They watched Marcus climb. He's fearless, the man said. He falls sometimes, she said, but he always gets back up. He doesn't even cry most of the time. He just looks at the ground like he's disappointed in it and gets up. The man smiled. He gets that from you, he said. She looked at him. You always got back up, he said, and you always looked slightly disappointed at whatever knocked you down. She looked away. I remember being knocked down more than getting up. That's because you were doing the getting up, he said. It's harder to see yourself from the outside. She was quiet. Marcus had made it to the top of the climbing structure and was standing up there with both hands raised in triumph and looking for someone to show this to. He found his mother, who gave him a thumbs up. Then he found the man, looked at him for a moment, and gave him a very serious, very deliberate thumbs up, which was an invitation and an extension of trust and a beginning, all in one small gesture. The man gave him a thumbs up back. Marcus was satisfied. He began the descent, which was significantly less graceful than the ascent, involving a moment of reconsidering his decisions halfway down that his mother watched without intervening, because she had learned that he needed to figure certain things out on his own. He figured it out. He got to the bottom, looked at the ground, slightly disappointed in it, got up, went straight for the slide. The man watched him with an expression that she observed in her peripheral vision, and chose not to comment on directly, because some things need to be felt privately before they could be spoken. They stayed at the park for 2 hours. Marcus eventually came to them instead of going back to the structure, which meant he was getting tired, and he sat on the bench between the two adults and ate a snack and asked the man a series of questions that were both extremely random and somehow profoundly diagnostic. Did he have a dog? What was his favorite color? Did he know how to do a somersault? Why was the sky blue? What was the biggest number? The man answered every question with complete seriousness. No, blue, but also green. He used to but probably couldn't anymore, because of the way light works, which is a really good question. Infinity, which is a name for a number so big it never stops. Marcus thought about infinity for a while. Then he said, that's a lot of numbers. The man said, it really is. Marcus looked at him, then at his mother, then back at the man. He said, can you come to the park again? The man looked at her. She looked at Marcus. We'll see, she said. Marcus looked at the man. The man said, I'd really like to. Marcus nodded, apparently satisfied, and slid off the bench and went back to the slide, having concluded his assessment and reached a preliminary positive verdict. She watched him go. Then she said quietly, he's going to get attached very quickly. The man said, I know. So if you're not sure... I'm sure, he said. She looked at him. I have never been more sure of anything, he said, since I had a ring in my jacket pocket, and I was 2 weeks from using it. I am that sure. She looked at her hands. He said carefully, I'm not asking you to be sure yet. I know you need time. I know trust is not something you can decide to have. I know it has to be built. I just need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to start this and stop. If you let me in, I'm all the way in. She looked at him. All the way, she said. All the way. She looked at Marcus on the slide, at the back of his head, at the red jacket and the light-up sneakers and the set of his shoulders that was so familiar it still caught her off guard sometimes. She said very quietly, I spent 4 years being angry at you for something I built in my own head. He was quiet. I saw a car and I made a whole story out of it, she said. I was so afraid of being wrong about you that I made you into the wrong thing before you could be it. You were protecting yourself. I was destroying something that didn't deserve to be destroyed. He said, we both made mistakes. She said, mine had consequences. He said, they did, and I don't want to minimize that. But the consequences, sitting on that slide over there looking exactly like someone I would have chosen for my son if I had been given the chance to choose. He paused. He is exactly who I would have hoped for. She looked at Marcus. Marcus had made a friend at the bottom of the slide. A child a similar age who had appeared from somewhere, and whom Marcus was now directing in construction of something that appeared to involve a significant quantity of wood chips. She smiled. The real smile, not the shape of a smile, not the memory of one, the actual thing. He saw it. He had been waiting 4 years to see it again. He did not say anything. Some things needed to be held quietly. They sat on the bench. The morning moved around them. Marcus built his wood chip structure. And the two adults who had found each other by accident and lost each other through fear, and found each other again by the kind of collision that is too precise to be random, sat on a bench in a park and began, slowly and carefully, and without any promises they could not keep, the complicated, necessary, worthwhile work of finding their way back. It was not easy. Nobody said it would be easy. The weeks that followed were careful. He came to the park on Saturdays. He and Marcus built a vocabulary together, the particular private language of man and a small child who were figuring out how to belong to each other. They had jokes. They had rituals. Marcus decided that the man was required to perform a specific high five that involved 3 steps and a sound effect, and he enforced this requirement with absolute consistency. The man learned the high five. He and she talked on the phone. Short calls at first, then longer ones. Then the kind of calls that you start without a specific topic, and then an hour later having covered everything, and nothing and feeling, somehow, more like yourself than you did before. She told him about the business, the real details, the loan and the kitchen lease, and the 3 employees and the plan. He listened. He asked questions that were not the questions of someone with money looking at a small operation and calculating its shortfalls. They were the questions of someone who respected what she had built and wanted to understand it fully. She talked about a problem she was having with a supplier. He thought about it for a few days and then offered connection, not a solution, a connection to someone who might be able to help. She followed up on the connection herself, on her own terms, and it helped. He told her about the company, the real details, the parts that the magazines didn't get right, and the parts that were harder than they looked, and the parts that kept him up at night. She listened. She asked the kind of questions that come from genuinely wanting to understand, rather than from preparing a response. She noticed when something was hard for him. She had always been good at that. He noticed when she was tired in a way that was past regular tired. He had always been good at that, too. One evening, he showed up at her apartment door. She opened it and looked at him. He had takeout, the same place they used to order from when she worked in his building. He had remembered after all this time that it was her favorite. She stared at the bag. He said, "You sounded tired on the phone." She said, "I am tired." He said, "So I thought you probably shouldn't have to cook." She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she stepped aside and let him in. Marcus came running from the other room when he heard the door and skidded to a stop and looked at the man and at the takeout bag and made the rapid calculation of a child who has just determined that dinner is about to be an event. He said, "Are you staying for dinner?" The man looked at her. She looked at Marcus. She said, "If he behaves." Marcus looked at the man with an expression of absolute solidarity, the expression of a small person who has allied himself with an adult against the concept of behavioral conditions. And the man looked back with gravity that confirmed the alliance, and Marcus nodded, satisfied, and went to get his chair. He stayed for dinner. Marcus fell asleep at the table before dessert, which she had predicted and he had bet against. And she had been right, and he had owed her the last spring roll, which she ate with the deliberate satisfaction of someone who enjoys being right almost as much as they enjoy spring rolls. He cleaned up while she put Marcus to bed. When she came back, the kitchen was clean, and he was standing at the window looking out at the city, the way she had once looked out at the city from her apartment on the east side, and thought about what she was building and who she was building it with. She stood in the doorway. He heard her, turned around. She said, "You didn't have to clean up." He said, "I wanted to." She looked at the clean kitchen, at him standing by the window, at the city behind him. She said, "This is..." She stopped. He waited. She said, "This is very close to something I've been trying not to want." He said, "I know." She said, "Because wanting it again is terrifying." I know. What if we... He said, I'm not asking you to be unafraid. I'm asking you to be afraid, and to try anyway, just like you did with the business. You were afraid of that too. You did it anyway. She looked at him. You told me once that you were not scared of the figuring, he said. I don't think that's entirely true. I think you are scared sometimes. I think the figuring scares you. I think you do it anyway because the alternative is worse. She was quiet for a long time. He did not fill the silence. He had learned, years ago, that she needed to think before she spoke, and that the silence was not emptiness but work. She said finally, I never stopped. He said, what? She said, loving you, I never stopped. I was angry for a long time, and I built something in my head that wasn't real, and I ran from it. But underneath all of that, she stopped, started again. I named him Marcus. He understood what she was saying. She had been carrying him with her the whole time. Even when she was trying not to, he crossed the room. He stood in front of her. He did not reach out yet. He was not a man who assumed. He said, there's a ring in a drawer in my apartment. She looked at him. It's been there for 4 years, he said. I bought it 2 weeks before you left. I put it in a drawer the day I understood you weren't coming back. She was completely still. I'm not asking you today, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking today or tomorrow or next week. I know we have things to figure out. I know trust takes time, and I know there are things between us that need more than one coffee shop conversation to repair. He paused. But I want you to know it exists, that it has existed for 4 years, that it was always yours. She did not move for a long time. Then she reached out and put her hand on the side of his face. The same hand, the same gesture, from the fire escape, from a lifetime ago, from the first time she said, I love you too. He closed his eyes. She said very quietly, I know you'll get there. He opened his eyes. She was smiling, the real one, the one he had been waiting 4 years for. He put his hand over hers. They stayed like that for a moment, just a moment, but it was a real moment, the kind that you carry forever, the kind that you use to measure other moments against, the kind that, years later, when someone asks you when you knew it was going to be okay, you think of this exact second in this kitchen with the city behind the window and a child asleep in the next room and 4 years of loss between you and a future in front of you that was not guaranteed but was no longer unimaginable. He went home that night. He did not stay. It was not time for that yet, and they both knew it. But he went home different from how he had arrived, and she went to the window after he left and looked out at the city and felt, for the first time in 4 years, like the view was pointing towards something instead of away from it. Things moved carefully after that, deliberately, with the specific patience of 2 people who have learned the cost of moving too fast and too far without being sure. Marcus's understanding grew in a way of children's understanding, which is to say it grew naturally, without drama, in the direction of simple truth. He knew the man had his face. He knew the man came to the park on Saturdays and to dinner sometimes. He knew his mother smiled in a specific way when the man's name came up that she did not smile in at other times. He was 3 years old. He was building his picture of the world, and the man was becoming part of it. One Saturday at the park, after the high-five ritual had been completed and Marcus had climbed the structure and given his thumbs up and come down and been mildly disappointed in the ground and gotten up, he came and stood in front of the man and said, with a directness that is the greatest gift and greatest terror of small children, "Are you my dad?" He had asked this before, in the coffee shop, the first day. This time there was no deflection needed. The man looked at her. She gave a small nod. He crouched down so he was at Marcus's level, which was important, because this conversation deserved eye contact between equals. He said, "Yes." Marcus looked at him. "I'm your dad," the man said. "I know I haven't been here from the beginning. I know that's different from some kids' dads. And I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier. But I'm here now, and I'm going to keep being here." Marcus thought about this with the gravity it deserved. Then he said, "Can you help me with the monkey bars?" Mama's arms are shorter. The man laughed. That full, real laugh. The one from Cincinnati. Marcus took his hand, and led him to the monkey bars. She sat on the bench and watched. A man she had loved for 5 years crouched at the base of the monkey bars and talked her son, their son, through the reach and the grip and the swing with a patience and a joy that was so unperformed, so completely real, that she had to look away for a moment. She looked up at the sky. It was a clear day, the kind of day where the sky is so blue it looks like something out of a movie, and the light is the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more significant than it actually is. And you think that if this were a movie, you would say the lighting was too on the nose. But life is not a movie. Life is messier and slower and more complicated, and the resolutions do not arrive in neat packages, which was why this one, imperfect and ongoing and still being figured out, felt more real and more worth having than anything scripted ever could. From the monkey bars, Marcus yelled, "Mama, Mama, look." She looked. He had made it across. Small hands. Full reach. All the way to the end. The man was standing there with his hands ready in case he fell, not holding on, just there in case, which was exactly right. Marcus let go and dropped to the ground, looked at the ground, slightly disappointed in it. Got up. She laughed. Marcus ran back to the beginning of the monkey bars, to do it again. The man turned and found her watching, and the look that crossed his face was the look of someone who has found the place they were always supposed to be, and is just now, finally, fully arriving. She looked back at him. For years. 2 bags before sunrise. A card on expensive paper. A child with his grandfather's name. A ring in a drawer. A rainy street. And a car that stopped too fast. And a small face that looked up with open, uncomplicated curiosity. All of it. Every bit of it. Leading here. He walked back to the bench. Sat down beside her. They watched Marcus set up for his second attempt at the monkey bars. He said, "There's a thing I want to ask you." She said, "I know." He said, "Not yet." She said, "I know." He said, "But eventually." She said, "I know that too." He said, "And?" She watched Marcus grab the first bar. Both hands. Full grip. She said, "Ask me when you're ready." He said, "I've been ready for 4 years." She smiled. Marcus made it across again. Dropped to the ground. Got up. Ran back to do it again. The city moved around them. The day moved around them. And 2 people sat on a bench in particular golden light of morning that had no idea it was being significant. And let the future arrive the way futures do when you stop being afraid of them. Step by step. The proposal, when it came, was not at a restaurant. It was not announced. It was not photographed. It happened on a Tuesday evening, which is the most ordinary day of the week, in the kitchen of her apartment, during the cooking of a dinner that Marcus had insisted on supervising and had then lost interest in and abandoned in favor of a pile of blocks in the next room. She was at the stove. He was at the counter doing the thing he had started doing several months ago, which was being comfortable in her kitchen, in the way of a person who has been welcomed into a space enough times that it has started to feel like theirs. She was telling him about a problem with a supplier, not the same problem from before, a new one. She had a plan for it. She was walking to a plan, because talking through plans helped her think, and he had learned to be useful in these conversations not by offering solutions, but by asking the right questions. He was about to ask the right question. Instead, he reached into his pocket. She had her back to him. He said, "I have a question." She said, still at the stove, "The supplier or the kitchen lease?" He said, "Neither." Something in his voice made her turn around. He was standing by the counter with the ring, just holding it, not on one knee, not with a speech prepared, not with flowers or a restaurant or a photographer positioned outside, just standing in her kitchen on a Tuesday evening with 4 years of waiting in his hand and his eyes completely unguarded in a way she had only seen once before on a fire escape a lifetime ago. She went still. He said, "I told you I'd ask when I was ready." She said very quietly, "You said you've been ready for 4 years." "I have," he said. "I was waiting for you to be ready." She looked at the ring. It was simple, more simple than she would have expected from a man of his resources. A single stone, clean setting, the kind of thing that looks like it was chosen by someone who thought carefully about what would last rather than what would impress. She said, "You thought about what I'd want." He said, "For 4 years." She stood at the stove in her kitchen on a Tuesday with a wooden spoon in her hand and a 3-year-old building blocks in the next room, and a man in front of her holding 4 years of patience in the form of a small, perfect, carefully chosen ring. She said, "Yes." He said, "I haven't asked yet." She said, "The answer is yes." He smiled. That smile, the one she had seen first in an elevator, the one she had fallen into, the one she had spent 4 years looking at in miniature on a small face at the breakfast table. She crossed the kitchen. He put the ring on her finger. She put both hands on the side of his face. From the next room, Marcus said loudly, "What is happening in there?" She laughed. He laughed. She said, "Come in here, bud." Marcus came in with a block in each hand and the expression of someone who expects the need to assess a situation. He looked at his mother, at the man, at the ring on her hand, at the way they were both looking at him. He said, "Is that a ring?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Like a merry ring?" She said, "Like a merry ring." Marcus thought about this very seriously. He looked at the man. "So you're going to live here?" he asked. The man looked at her. She looked at Marcus. She said, "We're going to figure out the details." Marcus looked at the man again. Then he held out one of his blocks. He did not say anything. He just held it out. The man looked at the block, looked at the boy, understood, in the language that exists between people who have been paying enough attention to each other, that this was not just a block. This was an offering. This was the 3-year-old version of all the way in. He took the block. Marcus nodded, satisfied. He went back to his blocks. The adult stood in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening with a ring and a block, and the smell of dinner on the stove, and the sound of a child building something in the next room. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He stood very still, so as not to disturb the moment. The city moved outside the window. The dinner finished cooking. Marcus built his structure in the next room until it collapsed, and he said, mildly, the way he always did when things fell, which was exactly the sound his mother made when things did not go the way she had planned. He was exactly who they would have hoped for. He was exactly who they had made. The 3 of them had dinner. Marcus told a story about something that happened at the playground that was extremely complicated and involved several characters whose motivations he explained in great detail and whose ultimate resolution involved someone sharing a swing, which he felt was a correct outcome. She listened, the man listened, and later, after Marcus was in bed and the dishes were done, and they were sitting together at the table in particular quiet of a house where a child has recently been very loud and is now asleep, she said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Tell me." She said, "There is not a day since Marcus was born that I did not think about you. Not one. Even the days I was angry. Even the days I told myself I had made the right choice. Even the days I was so proud of what I was building that I almost convinced myself I didn't need anything else." She looked at the ring. "I was always going to find my way back," she said. "I think I always knew that. I was just afraid of what I'd find when I got here." He said, "What did you find?" She looked at him. "You," she said. "Same as before, just 4 years further in." He said, "Is that okay?" She said, "It's better." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because you know now what I didn't trust you enough to tell you then. You know what it costs to lose something real. And I know what it costs to run from something, because you're afraid of losing it." He was quiet. She said, "We both know what this is worth now." He said, "We do." She said, "So we won't waste it." He said, "We won't." They sat there, the ring on her hand, the block in his jacket pocket, which he had put there after dinner without explaining why, and which she had noticed and not commented on. His grandfather's name asleep in the next room. Everything broken, and everything found, and everything beginning. Outside the window of the city did what cities do. It kept going. It kept going without asking whether you were ready, without waiting for your resolution, without marking the moments that mattered because it had 10 million other moments to attend to simultaneously. But the moment was real. It was happening. 2 people at a table in a small apartment above a city, choosing each other with full knowledge of the cost, which is the only way choosing means anything. Step by step, feet on the ground, not afraid of the figuring. There is something that must be said about Marcus, not just as a detail of the story, not just as the evidence of what was lost and found, as himself, as the person he was already becoming at 3 years old, which is both earlier than people expect and exactly as early as anyone who pays attention expects. He was curious the way that children are curious when they've been surrounded by adults who answer their questions honestly, which is to say, he was curious without embarrassment. He asked things. He followed the answers. He asked what the answer meant. He followed that too, until he reached the edge of what could be explained in 3-year-old terms, at which point he would nod with great dignity, as if he had decided to reserve judgment until he had more information. He was generous in the specific, uncomplicated way of children who have been loved consistently, which is to say he gave things away freely. His food, when he had extra, his toys, to children at the park who looked sad, his blocks, to a man in a kitchen on a Tuesday who was holding a ring. He was funny in the way that people are funny, when they say exactly what they think without the social filters that adults spend their whole lives developing. He said things like, "This sandwich is not being its best self today," and "I think that bird is having a think," and "Mama, you look like you need a nap, but I don't." He was, in short, exactly himself, which is the best possible thing a person can be at any age, and which is a gift that can only come from being raised by someone who was not trying to shape you into anything other than the fullest version of what you already were. She had done that, alone, for 3 years, with everything that required. She had done that. He thought about that every time he looked at Marcus. He thought about it when Marcus came to him on a Saturday with a question about how elevators worked, a question inspired by a story his mother had apparently told him, and he answered the question, and Marcus followed the answer, and asked what the answer meant, and they spent 40 minutes following that thread all the way to physics, at which point Marcus nodded with great dignity and reserved judgment. He thought about it when Marcus woke up one night with a bad dream, and she was at the door before Marcus had finished calling for her, and he heard her voice through the wall, steady and warm and completely sure, saying, "I'm here. I'm right here. Tell me about it." And Marcus's voice saying something he could not make out, and her voice saying, "That sounds scary, but you know what? You figured it out even in the dream. You were brave even when you were scared." And Marcus going quiet and then small and satisfied, "I was brave." He thought about all the nights he had not been there for that. He did not let himself be crushed by it. That was a temptation, the guilt of the years missed, and he had watched it from a careful distance, and decided that guilt was not a productive use of the time he had now. He could not give Marcus the first 3 years. He could give him everything after. He gave him everything after. There were complications. Of course there were. Life does not smooth itself out for convenience. His company went through a major transition that required 6 months of his complete and total attention in a way that was not compatible with the kind of presence he was trying to build. He was honest with her about this from the beginning. He did not disappear into it. He called. He showed up when he said he would show up. When he could not show up, he called before, not after. He was transparent in a way that you can only be transparent with someone who you have already lost once and do not intend to lose again. She had her own complications. The business at a period where everything that could go wrong went wrong simultaneously, the way things sometimes do, and she was exhausted and frustrated and short-tempered in a way that she recognized and named directly. "I am not being easy to be around right now, and I know it, and I'm sorry, and I'm working on it." He said, "I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real." She said, "Well, this is extremely real." He said, "Good." There were disagreements about money, specifically about her fierce independence around money, which he respected, and also sometimes found difficult when he could see a problem that he had the resources to solve and she needed to solve it herself. They negotiated this, not once but several times, as new situations arose, finding the specific line between respecting her independence and being a partner rather than a bystander. There were moments of doubt, hers mostly, not about him specifically, but about the concept of trusting again, which is not a thing you repair with one good conversation, no matter how honest, but rather a thing you repair gradually, through accumulation of evidence, through showing and being shown, through 1,000 small moments of choosing and being chosen, until one day you realize that the fear has been replaced by something else, not certainty, because certainty is a lie, but faith, the reasonable, evidence-based faith of a person who has paid attention and found the evidence credible. There were moments of pure joy. Marcus's fourth birthday, which they threw in the park where they'd spend their first Saturday, with a climbing structure and a cake that she had made herself, and that was, in Marcus's critical estimation, the best cake probably in the city. The man was there, not as a guest, but as a fixture, as someone who belonged in the photographs, as the person who held Marcus on his shoulders, so he could see over the crowd of small friends who had gathered and who told the story of infinity in a way that 4-year-olds could follow. Imagine the biggest number you can think of. Now add one. You can always add one. Forever. That's infinity. Marcus, on his shoulders, looking out at his birthday and his friends and his mother laughing at something, and the cake that was probably the best in the city, said, "That's a lot of birthdays." The man said, "It really is." Marcus said, "Good." There was a morning, 3 months before the wedding they were planning with the specific, deliberate, unhurried care of two people who had already wasted enough time on wrong timing, when Marcus woke up very early and padded into the kitchen and found the man there, because he had stayed over, which was a newer development, and which Marcus had accepted with the calm adaptability of a child whose world was expanding in ways that felt safe. And Marcus climbed onto the stool at the counter and looked at the man who was making coffee and said, without preamble, "Am I supposed to call you Dad?" The man turned around. He crouched down so he was at Marcus's level. He said, "What do you want to call me?" Marcus thought about it. "I want to call you Dad," he said, "but I don't know if that's the right rule." The man said, "The rule is what feels right to you. I'm your dad. So if you want to call me that, that's exactly right." Marcus considered this. Then he said, "Okay," poured himself a cup of the juice he had come in for,